I'm really pleased to be speaking to these two lovely ladies, and I just want to share the little piece that's on the website, and want to remind myself as much as everybody else of what this call is about. So many of us have experiences that seem to force us into accepting a label. Those labels could be as dramatic as rape survivor, alcoholic, or addict. But those labels, are those labels even accurate? That's the question. Are they helpful in any way? Another question. Or are they keeping us from seeing who we really are, and ultimately from truly connecting with others? That's what we're going to explore today in this talk. So we're going to explore that with these two lovely ladies, Eva Robinson and Mary Schiller. And first, just want to say a couple of lines, a couple of things I know about Eva. These are two new friends for me. I haven't met them until we had a pre-call about the Telesummit. So I know Eva from her bio has been teaching the principles since 1994, and you can see their official bios on the website, by the way. So she's been teaching the principles since 1994 because she says her life transformed 1,000% upon seeing the true nature of life for herself. So she's with us on this call because she knows a lot about labels, given her history with alcohol and drugs, loss of a husband, loss of a son too. So she's got loads to share with us on this, I'm sure. Mary Schiller is a transformative coach based in the 3 principles, who enjoys working with people around the world via the wonders of technology, both individually and in groups. And in addition to being a coach, Mary's a communications professional and editor, and has authored several books. And I know she's a fan of getting books out there, because she says she's got lots to come in 2017. Mm-hmm. Both ladies are sitting in California, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
I am.
Yeah, cool. So you're around the corner from each other, more or less. I'm not. I'm in Spain. So, Mary, we're going to kick off with you today, I believe.
Okay.
Just as I've said in all these sessions, would you just share a little bit of your journey, a little bit of history, if you like, and that kind of brings us to today, why you're here on this Telesummit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really happy to be here, first of all, so thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you and everybody who's listening. I would say my journey started quite a few years ago when I was in my 20s, and I was in an abusive first marriage at that time. And it was something that obviously I didn't expect to encounter. It's not at all what I thought would happen once I married that particular person. But what happened as a result of that was that I spent, even after I left the marriage, I spent my entire adult life really with the label of domestic violence survivor, rape survivor, because that was part of what he was about, my ex-husband, and also post-traumatic stress disorder sufferer. So I kind of walked through my entire adult life with those 3 labels attached to me. And I didn't actually realize the significance of that until I encountered the principles in 2014. Those labels seemed just normal to me. I mean, of course I was a domestic violence survivor. Of course I was a rape survivor. Of course I suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Those just seemed like givens. So why would I even question it? It wasn't even part of my consciousness that I wasn't those things. Mm-hmm. And I think that was actually part of the problem in a big way, because the well-meaning professionals that I saw during that time to try to help me with the problems I was having also had that view of me, that I was those labels, that I was those things. And I feel like that was really like a shield between me and actually getting help. That because they couldn't see anything really past that, they couldn't see that those were simply words, descriptions, but they weren't actually me, I don't think that they were really able to help me, because nobody saw me as a fundamentally healthy person. They saw me as someone who had a mental illness, who had been through severe trauma. I remember very distinctly the last therapist I saw was in 2011 and 2012. I was in this therapeutic program for about 16 months. And she said to me at one point, I will never forget this. She said, you know, I can't figure out how it is that you've had a reasonably successful life despite everything that's happened to you. You know, you got remarried, you raised a daughter, you've had good jobs, you know, and considering how horrific your past is, I can't figure out how you've managed to be okay, essentially, you know, in terms of the world and how the world, she knew I was suffering, you know, psychologically. And I thought to myself, well, geez, what does that mean? Like, you know, that was really weird. And, but that, looking back on it, that's kind of a good example of what we're talking about. That when somebody has a label on them like that, it puts them in a box that makes it look like if anything is outside that box, it's strange or inexplicable. And it's certainly, since we're talking about, you know, community and community building, it certainly had the effect of making me feel like I was not connected to other people. I walked around much of that time feeling incredibly isolated from other people who hadn't experienced trauma, who hadn't been raped, who hadn't, you know, been abused, who hadn't suffered from a mental illness. I felt completely shut out in a lot of instances because, you know, I felt like I had been through something that that had set me apart in some way from other people. And it wasn't until I ran across the principles in 2014 and I started to get that, oh, wait a second, maybe there isn't anything actually wrong with me, you know? Maybe I actually don't even have a mental illness that I'm going to have to live with forever. Maybe all that trauma and all of that, maybe that isn't exactly what I thought it was. You know, maybe I was seeing things differently and maybe I can see them in a new way now. I can see myself in a new way now. So that's kind of in a nutshell, you know, what this progression has been like for me, was then realizing that actually there wasn't anything wrong with me. And I was connected to the larger community and the larger world, that there was actually nothing separating me from them or them from me. And that was a pretty big moment for me to realize that.
Yeah, I bet that's an understatement.
Say the least, yes. It'd be hard to put into words what that actually felt like.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. And I'd love to come back to that, to what it is that you actually saw for yourself at that point in time. But we'll jump over to Eva and we'll come back to you on that one, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. So Eva, same question for you. How, you know, what your journey? I mean, you know, I know a little bit of it. I've read some of it on the website, but and there's a lot there. So do you want to share some of it? Let everybody know.
Yes, Sheila. Thank you. Yes. Like you said, it is quite a long story. You know, I was reflecting last night on the topic, and I realized that I teach this in my classes too. I talk about this because it's real. It's what happened. I can remember many times my father, my parents, and my aunts and uncles getting together on the weekends, and they would drink beer and play cards, right? And this is what they did on the weekends. And I don't know how many times I heard blonde jokes. And it never had any meaning to me at all until I think I was around 5 or 6. And I can remember hearing my father tell a blonde joke as I was going into the bathroom. And I looked in the mirror and I said, oh my goodness, I have blonde hair. And at that young age, just that young age, 5 or 6, I labeled myself as a dumb blonde. You know, you hear all the jokes and the stories about, you know, blondes and, you know, Marilyn Monroe, Chrissy on Three's Company, you know, all that confirmed everything that I had started already thinking about myself. So I know with all my heart that my father did not set out to hurt his daughter. He was just telling a joke, right? So, but for some reason, it meant something to me. And that, I think at that young age is when it occurred to me that I saw myself as a dumb blonde. And so there was no sense in really trying in school because I wasn't going to be able to learn anyway, which of course is totally false. And as the years went by, you know, it got more and more intense, more and more believable to me that this is, you know, my life. And that's when while my father was at the bar drinking, my mother was at the church praying for him. And so there was never anybody at home, you know, for me. And so, you know, when a child doesn't get the love and the compassion and stuff that they need at home, they look elsewhere. And I wound up getting pregnant at 14, and I had my son at 15, when I was 15. And it just, then I called myself a bad mom because I didn't know the first thing about mothering. I mean, I wasn't old enough, you know. But what I did know is that nobody was going to take my child from me, no matter how much they tried. And my parents did try to get me to give him up for adoption. But it was like in that state of mind, he was like a possession to me. You know, this is mine. You can't have him. Nobody's going to take him. This is my baby, you know, and I'm going to love him and he's going to love me. And so when I was just, I think I was still 17. He was almost 3. He was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And I wasn't no more ready to be a mother, much less a mother of a terminal child, you know. So my psyche, my whatever, just cracked. And I needed some relief, and that's when I turned to drugs and alcohol. And I knew from the very beginning when I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous, when I first got into treatment, something didn't feel right. Hi, I'm Eva, and I'm an alcoholic. It didn't feel right, you know? And that's one of those labels, again, that I hear over and over again in classes that I teach, that people identify that. I work with clients now that have been diagnosed with mental illness, right? And on top of addiction. And it breaks my heart to hear them say, you know, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm an addict, and I'm you know, schizophrenic or whatever, right? They put those labels on themselves. So that's where the 3 principles come in, you know. I've had tremendous success with working with this clientele that has been, that they're seeing that they are not that label, you know, that they are, that they never were, you know, that there really is and always has been this innate health, this goodness, this kindness, this well-being inside them. And when the looks on their face when they first see that it's just amazing, you know. Just like it was for me when it occurred to me that I was the one creating my own misery via my own thinking. When I saw it was me, it was like a revelation. You know, it was heaven sent. It was heaven sent, you know, because I was free of all that garbage that I had grown up with. And I think that's the sum of it for right now. Yeah. I mean, when I say my life has changed 1,000%, I literally mean that, because even with my son's passing, I can see. I mean, I have gratitude in my heart. I have love in my heart for even having had him in my life, you know? And yeah, we'll talk more about that later, but I think we should get back to Mary.
Well, thank you, Eva, and thank you, Mary, because, you know, as I'm sitting there listening to you, you've both got really what would be called, and I'm calling very, very difficult pasts, very traumatic pasts. And, you know, you've mentioned the label PTSD, Mary, already, but, you know, no, I don't want to take away from that at all. So really, really grateful and very, you know, very generous of you both to share your stories so candidly. Really appreciate that. Mary, then, to go back to you know what I said before about you came across the 3 principles. Can you talk to us more about that? Because I think that's a powerful place for us to.
Yeah, I've often reflected on the fact that even though I stopped counting at 25 different mental health professionals from the very beginning until that one that I mentioned that I saw in 2011, 2012. You know, I saw a lot of people from age 22 to 52. And I realized that there was something that was still prodding me to keep looking. Because like Eva just said, something didn't sit right with me. It didn't, you know, it just didn't feel like that was the end of the story, you know. And I feel like there was, you know, to use three principles speak, I feel like mind was speaking to me through hope and through, looking and continuing to search for something. And so in 2014, you can decide for yourself whether it was random, but it seemed like a random occurrence that I ran across Michael Neal's book, The Inside Out Revolution. I didn't know anything about the principles. I didn't understand any of it really. When I first encountered it, the first time I listened to the book, it sounded like gibberish. Literally, it seemed like I was listening to someone speak a foreign language. I didn't understand a word he was saying.
Yeah.
And yet, there was something in there that felt real to me. So I just set aside my skepticism and my misunderstanding at the beginning, and I kept listening to it. I was listening to him on Audible. And every time I listened to the book, I heard something else. Like it started to sound less like gibberish and more like something. I don't know. I don't even want to say English because it was more than just the words. I know that's such a cliche, but it did seem like there was something behind the words that I was starting to hear. And after a few listens, I would literally get to the end and listen all the way through, and then I would just start it again, and I'd listen again. And at some point in there, I heard this message that I was not broken.
Yeah.
And I can get really emotional about that because I saw myself as a completely broken person for so many years, that to really hear someone say that and not, it wasn't even just that I believed him, it was so obviously true. It wasn't a matter of him having to, convince me through his book that this was a fact. It was just so obviously a fact. Because I was like, how could I ever be broken? I'm not this body that I'm living in. This container is a container. It's not me. And it was just so obvious that I, just like Eva described, it was such a major shift. It was like I woke up in a new world. My old world was completely gone, and I was in a whole new space that I didn't totally recognize and looked kind of strange to me, but seemed completely, I don't know, it seemed like truth.
Yeah.
Love that. That has to be huge.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be huge for you, for everything to look so different.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. And just from listening to a book, how amazing is that on some level? It just shows anything's possible at any time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that Eva and I had a similar thing that we said, that the labeling felt wrong.
Right.
It didn't feel like a comfortable fit. And it just didn't seem like that was truly me, but I didn't know who I was. If I wasn't that, what was I?
So let's keep exploring that then, because I think I don't think that's what we were talking about for the call, for this session. Do you have something you want to say, Eva, to hand over to you?
Yes, I just want to tell Mary that I appreciate you so much, because even though our paths are different, they're so similar. They're so similar. And I too know that for anybody listening, if you have any type of thinking about yourself that doesn't make you feel good about yourself, it's a misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding. Because even when my son passed away, from what I remember, my first thought was, oh my God, who am I now? Because I had always been Michael's mom. And that, again, is a label. So now Michael's not here. Who am I in this world? You know? And Elsie Spittle sent me an email shortly after Michael had transitioned from this world. And she said something like, I don't remember her exact words, but she said something like, Eva, I'm so sorry to hear about Michael. And then she proceeded to say, but this is going to be an exciting adventure for you to discover who you are now. And in the moment, I was in deep grief, you know? So I couldn't appreciate her words or her intent at that moment. But my wisdom told me to print out a couple copies of the email, and I taped a copy to my, by my computer at home. I taped a copy to the bathroom mirror. I taped a copy to my computer at work. And I taped a copy somewhere else, I can't remember, just so that I could reread and get the gist of what she was meaning. And Mary, I hear that from you. I hear that from you too, when you say that you discovered you weren't broken, that you never were. I had that same feeling. I thought I was broken from a very young age. Mm-hmm. And one moment I was in deep grief. And I don't know when it happened, but I wasn't. I was in gratitude. I was so grateful for the fact that I had him in my life in the first place. Mm-hmm. You know, that I got to experience being Michael's mother. And I also want to mention that I wasted so much time in personal thought, in thinking so much about myself and about him dying, that I was missing out on the fact that he was still alive. And when that hit me, when my eyes opened up, it was like, oh, he's not even dead yet. So I had 10 wonderful years with him, having had this understanding. To go back a little bit, I just want to say that I was introduced to the three principles in 1994. Only because I was a counselor, or I was a staff member at that time at Mariposa Lodge in Santa Clara County. And Bob Garner, who was the head of the Department of Alcohol and Drug Services, was introduced to the three principles and wanted it, all of his staff. I mean, he heard something, he saw something that changed his life, that he wanted his staff to be introduced to this understanding. And I happen to be one of those staff members. And at first, I was a little afraid because I was going to school for counseling. And I got this idea that I had to unlearn everything that I was learning in school. Because what I was learning in school is the techniques, and they never felt right. They never felt right. I felt broken from such a very young age until I was 38 years old when I was introduced to the principles, when I got sober. And even then, when I was sponsoring women, that is because that's what I was supposed to do in the 12-step program, which I'm not knocking at all. I'm just saying, I realized that I was mimicking my sponsor. I wasn't saying these things to these women from my heart. I mean, the things that I was taught kept me sober long enough so that I could hear the principles, so that I could really hear the principles. But I didn't connect. I knew there was a piece to life that I was missing. I knew that there was more to life than what I was seeing. And that gave me that little bit of hope. That little bit of hope that kept me going, so that when I was introduced to the principles, I recognized it. And I knew I was onto something. And to realize that universal mind always has been inside me. That it's always been talking to me. I had just been taught not to listen to it. And when that happened for me, the peace that came over me is unexplainable. Mary, I appreciate you so much. And for anybody that's listening to this today or whenever, I want you to know that this is truth. This is truth. There's not one single human being on this planet that doesn't have this built in.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you.
Thank you again for sharing so much of your story. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm aware of wanting to keep us on track of our topic today.
Yes.
The labels, and we said, are they helpful in any way, or are they keeping us from seeing, who we really are, and ultimately this thing about community. So, Mary, would you like to take over from that in some respect? But
sure.
How do you see that? I mean, do you see labels as being helpful sometimes? We've talked a bit, or you two have both spoken so lovely. So lovely. That's not very good English, is it?
I like it. It's fine.
Lovely. Yeah. So beautifully about how labels can hold us back as people.
Yeah.
Would you like to expand on that some more?
Yeah, sure. It's a little bit complicated, I think, because on the one hand, you don't want to act like you don't appreciate somebody's life experiences.
Yeah.
Or you don't want to say, you don't want to just cast that aside, because there are certain things that people go through that are, important and help to form, a lot of our, the way that we see the world and all of that. So on the one hand, I think there is some attention that has to be paid to those things. Where I think we end up unintentionally hurting ourselves is when those identities seem really fixed, and that they no longer look like simply a part of who we are, but they look like who we are. And I can give you an example of this that might help illustrate it, where before I came across the principles, I was in an online support group for women who had been through domestic violence. And for a long time, I found it helpful because I heard from other women who had similar experiences, so it didn't make me seem completely crazy. I mean, despite what the mental health community told me, I was like, well, here's a bunch of other people who have the same kinds of reactions and PTSD and stuff. So I'm not that weird. I thought I was a little weird, but not that weird. So in that way, it was kind of affirming in some sense, like, oh, maybe this isn't so strange. But then after I came across the principles, I found that I had to leave that group, because so much of the conversation seemed to simply reinforce that was who they were women who had PTSD from domestic violence, full stop. There didn't seem to be much room outside of that. So I think, that if we're looking at, to take this to the kind of the next step, if we're looking to solutions for some of these things, solutions to alcoholism, solutions to domestic violence. We simply have to look past these labels and realize what's really going on is everyone is responding to thought. You know, that thought is different in you and in me and in Eva and everyone listening, but we're all doing the same thing. And to me, that was a revelation, because it allowed me to see my first husband completely differently. It allowed me to understand why he acted the way that he did. It didn't excuse bad behavior, but it certainly was the first time I felt like I understood why he acted that way. And so, you know, that next step seems really important to me, to see that, you know, while the individual experiences are different, the global system that we're all in is the same. We're all doing the same thing. And that has allowed me to kind of move past that identifying with the label that was kind of placed on me and I placed on myself.
So labels, what I heard in what you said is that labels can be helpful in some respect, because you went along to the group, you felt like you weren't the only one. So, you know, if you hadn't been given that label, you wouldn't have joined that group with that label, you know, the group with that label. And so that at first was helpful. And then it wasn't so helpful anymore.
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess my natural next question in a way is, how do we know when it's helpful and when it's not? Is that, you know?
I'm really kind of grappling with this, to be honest, because, like I said, if it allows someone to have empathy for another person's life experience, then that seems helpful. But if the person themselves, or even someone looking at that person, then only starts to see them in that light, that doesn't seem helpful. So I don't know if that made sense, but
absolutely, that's what I heard, and that's why I asked the question. So there isn't, as far as you can see at the moment, there isn't a way to discern whether it's a good thing or a bad thing when I suppose it's like drop the label in a way. When is it, you know, does a person, well, I don't want to answer the question, I'm going to ask the question. So does a person follow wisdom in that moment? How would that work?
You know, it seems like when I went back into that group after I had found the principles, I started seeing those women very differently from the way they were seeing themselves. You know, I started seeing them from this more universal vantage point of, oh, okay, just like me, they have certain thinking that tells them certain things. And so while identifying with them was helpful to me to start with, I felt greater compassion, and I felt like if they had been open to it, which they weren't, I tried to sort of bring this into the conversation and they weren't into it. I feel like if they had been at that point more open to listening to this, our conversations might have taken on a whole different hue that was much more helpful to one another and much more about maybe looking at new answers and new solutions and connecting rather than isolating ourselves. Which in the, and I should point this out just in case anyone is listening to this who has had that experience with domestic violence, it's a very isolating experience because you don't want to talk about it. People don't want to talk about it. It's not, it's still sort of a taboo topic. And so it already has an isolating quality to it. And yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question either, but you know, it's just it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing because you don't want to negate someone's life experience, but at the same time, you want to help them expand their view of
Yeah.
who they actually are,
Yeah.
how they fit in.
So I see that Rose Saliba in the UK has said, perhaps labels can be a starting point. This is a question. Somewhere to set off from, but not hold on to. It's kind of what I think I was saying when I was asking you that question. So it seems that maybe it's a good starting point to bring you into a group, connect with a group of people like-minded. And then there's a point where it's healthier, perhaps, to when anything's not serving you well. But I suppose my question is around, how do you know whether it's serving you well or not? That's where people maybe hang on to a label too long.
Well, and I think even I kind of talked about that, where we said at some point it just, we kept going, this doesn't really feel right. It just, like, you want to shrug it off at some point.
Yeah. So in respect to how community expands when unhelpful labels fall away, that's the title of the session. How do you see that working? Maybe we'll jump over to Eva now. Give Eva a turn. What do you have to say for that one?
Well, what comes to mind for me is that exactly what Mary just said. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. It isn't right. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. Can you repeat it, please?
So yeah, the title is How Community Expands When Unhelpful Labels Fall Away. So really, right. I suppose I'm bringing us back to the point and wanting to expand some more on that, using that word again. So when unhelpful labels fall away, how is it that community expands? If you can just talk to that a little bit, that would be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Because when labels fall away, community rises. A good feeling towards man. I mean, when labels start falling away, we start seeing the good in each other rather than the bad. When just in my own household, okay, I've noticed that myself and my roommate, we have differences of opinion. But instead of being angry or upset with each other, it's like, okay, that's okay. And even with the neighbors, okay, with neighbors around here are, there's all different types, okay? And
so give them a label, Eva. The grumpy neighbour, the friendly neighbour. We've all got them, haven't we? The noisy neighbour.
Very noisy. Very noisy neighbour. Very noisy neighbour. I mean, she throws fits. Okay, and the whole neighborhood can hear her. And instead of being angry at her, because there's obviously something going on, right? 1 minute she's happy-go-lucky, just average like we are, and then the next thing, she's locked herself in the house and trashing her house and cussing the whole world out. And instead of being, excuse my language, angry, I'll say angry at her, right? You know, I feel compassion for her. It's like how difficult it must be to be her. You know, how difficult it must be to be her. And then there's some drug dealers down the street, right? And I don't really appreciate them being in the neighborhood. But again, I don't know their story. I don't know their story. So, you know, the best thing I can do is keep me and my dogs away from their area. And let them be. Let them be. I mean, if it gets too rowdy, you know, we have to call the police.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's self-preservation. You know, we have to take care of ourselves. But if they're just doing their thing and minding their own business, who am I to say? I mean, I used to be one. You know, I used to be one.
So I recognise that as you're saying that drug dealers, there's a label. You know,
Yeah.
there's individual people, and then we clump them together, don't we, and say drug dealers over there.
That's true.
Yeah. We don't see them, but you know, there's so many groups. They're not all coming to mind, but there's so many groups. They're like that. It's like, oh, they're the drug dealers over there. They're the gangs over there. They're the, you know, and then they kind of lose their faces, don't they? They lose their individuality. Now we've clumped them all together. Oh, they're the Republicans. They're the Democrats. Oh, and then we've got colours for people. They're the yellow people. They're that's kind of what came to mind with this topic for me. That, you know, then I've been saying every day, CSE has got a webinar about the division, you know, that they're going to be doing it in March, which is, we're in March already, aren't we?
Yeah.
This month.
Yeah.
And so as we talk about people, we are, it's just so ingrained in us, isn't it? Because I can hear you doing it. You probably don't even know you're doing it or don't realise you're doing it. And yeah. I'm listening for it on some level because of this call. But yeah, it's just a curious thing that we do. We've been taught to do it. Obviously, that's why we do it, isn't it? It's a curious thing we do, and how that stops community. That stops us coming together and connecting with people. Because that's the drug dealer over there. They're the drug dealers. Let's not connect with them. I'm not criticising you at all either. It's just that it's just what everybody does, isn't it?
It is, and I'm not taking it as criticism at all. In fact, it was eye-opening. It was eye-opening. Because it was very eye-opening. I still do it. And I probably always will. But I do it less. Mm-hmm. Now with this understanding than I did in the past.
I think that's the key, isn't it? There's much more awareness as we realise that, you know, thought is creating everything for us. Thought is a whole felt experience, and we give meaning to these labels. What about you, Mary? What do you see in what we've just been?
Yeah, I'm the kind of person who, I seem like I'm always looking for solutions to things. And it seems to me that really the only way to come up with truly creative and effective solutions is to understand how connected we all are, actually. And that these labels and names we have for one another are just made up. They don't actually have any meaning in them. People's experiences have meaning. And it's fine to appreciate those. And like Eva was saying, you know, we don't know what those people down the street are going through and why they're making the decisions they're making. We just know that universally it's because they have some kind of thinking that tells them that's the right thing to do. And so I guess where I'm coming from, I'll give a tangible example. Like, I keep wondering if there couldn't be a solution to domestic violence in bringing the two sides absolutely together. You know, not saying these are the abusers and these are the victims / survivors. They're human beings who are responding to thought. Can we have a conversation about that? So I feel like, you know, related to the title of this talk, that when I started to see myself as not different from everyone else, which is how I used to see myself. I saw myself as different. When I started seeing myself as even similar to or the same as my ex-husband, my behavior was different, my responses were different, but the cause was the same. I was listening to thinking, and that was causing me anxiety and stress. For him, he was listening to his thinking, and it made him lash out because he thought he had to hurt someone. There's no difference there on the highest level. And so that's why I feel like community starts to emerge when we start to see the universality of certain levels of our experience, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear that you saw that very deeply. That was your realization, yeah?
Because I walked around, believe me, I walked around all those years hating him, wishing he would fall off the face of the earth. I wanted him gone. And then when I started to see what the principles were showing me, I was like, oh, wait a second. Yeah, I do the same thing. I have thinking that I listen to, and then I act. That's no different from what he was doing. And again, it isn't saying that people should hurt someone. That's not what I'm saying. But the universality of that became very, very apparent to me. And I started, sort of like you were describing, Eva, about compassion for your neighbor. I started feeling compassion for him, and I had never had that.
Right.
In 30 years, I had never had that feeling towards him. And suddenly I did. I was like, whoa, you know, his life is very challenging, having to live like that and not seeing a separation between, you know, oh, I could actually take a pause here and not lash out at this person because it's a passing thought. I'll just wait. He wasn't able to, and still isn't, from what I understand, able to do that. So I feel like there's practical application to this in terms of bringing people together who might normally be seen as polar opposites. But if we can show people the commonality that we are all in, that seems like a huge step in the right direction towards finding answers to things.
Absolutely. That's the connection piece, isn't it? I mean, that's it doesn't take any effort when you can see that. It doesn't take any effort at all, does it? It's not like, I mean, there's so many tools and techniques out there and processes and systems for forgiveness and tons of stuff. And this is how you can deal with it.
Yeah, that all seems really weird to me now. It really does. It seems like, why would I want to spend any time on that? Like that just doesn't seem, you know, the act of forgiveness, for instance, was something that I worked on all those years and could never muster it. And then when I saw this, it was like, oh, well, that's kind of not even really the point, is it? It's understanding. It's seeing. For the act of forgiveness in and of itself, to me, seemed not necessary. It seemed like just sort of a concept.
Interesting.
Yes.
Do you have anything you want to add, Eve? I'm just looking at the time. We've only got 5 minutes left. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Well, I just as Mary was talking, something occurred to me, and I realized that. So I teach 2 classes a week, right? 3 principles classes at different facilities, and what I noticed is that last week I just finished teaching a class, and it was amazing. The response, the people, I learned from them, right? And as I was going out to my car, I was in this wonderful, wonderful mood. And the minute I hit traffic, I was cursing under my breath and all this stuff. And I saw very clearly what I was doing, that it was me. It wasn't the traffic. But that's happened to me more than once, you know. But yeah, I guess that's it. It's that I still do it, but I don't do it as often. I don't do it as often. And I think for anybody listening, I think that be gentle on yourself. Be gentle on yourself. Be kind to yourself. You know, forgive yourself. You know, because yeah, we can be harder on ourselves than other people can be on us. Yeah, and see the innocence.
Mm. Well, guess what? Just as so often happens, we have a question coming right at the end.
Oh, okay.
Are you willing to stay on for 5 minutes while we deal with this one?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? You got time?
Yeah, sure.
So it's an anonymous viewer. Is asking, how do you view systems? Which type of people? Okay, how do you view systems? Type of people such as Carol Tuttle, if you know who she is. So many of my friends believe in it and say how much it helps them understand themselves and others. On the other hand, I'm scared of locking myself into a belief. And I don't know if the next answer is the next one. I'm not sure. How do you view systems? I suppose what they're trying to say here is, how do you view systems such as Carol Tuttle? I kind of remember who she is. Which is basically self-improvement and self-help as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the viewer is asking. What do you know? Because there's a lot of systems out there. I mean, we mentioned it, didn't we? Or I did, about forgiveness and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I personally, this is just my personal view. Mm-hmm. I think the whole idea that I have to improve myself is bunk.
Yes.
So anything that's telling me I need to improve myself, I don't listen to that at all.
Well, there's a clear-cut solution.
I mean, there's nothing to improve. There's stuff for me to see. There's new stuff for me to see.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I don't see that as needing to, like I said in the beginning, I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed or improved. Everything's cool.
Mm.
I just, really, I'm fine, and so are you. And but there's always more to see because it's infinite, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the direction that I look. I would never look to anything that confined me to some sort of system other than the system of mind, thought, consciousness, if you want to call it a system.
Yeah. Well, that's just the way it works. Sometimes
it's the way it works. Right. That's just how it is. So let me explore that system. Particularly the mind piece, I find really the only one that I'm really interested in exploring.
Right.
So.
Well, that view has come back and redefined and said Carol Tuttle is all about understanding your energy and how that comes into the world. So that's, that's mind, isn't it? Energy.
It is, basically. So, so that's really the only direction that I'm interested in looking.
Cool. Okay, well, I just want to say that think somebody said, that happens to me too. I see it, but then I still behave in a way I don't like. Am I just being stubborn? I think that's probably to Eva, because it came in when just after Eva was talking about the driving, cussing under your breath, and I think that might be what that's alluding to. So somebody's saying, "Am I just being stubborn?" What do you say to that, Eva?
You know what? I don't think it's being stubborn. I think it's being human.
Yeah.
It's just being human. And we see it when we see it.
Yeah.
You know, and it happens less and less and less and less. You know.
And we don't have to take it so seriously either.
Exactly.
It's like, so what? You cursed out the traffic. Oh well.
Yeah,
I know.
You know, even when I say things like to my husband that I shouldn't say, you know, I apologize, but I don't dwell on it.
Right.
Like, what's the point of that? I had a thought that I responded to, and I probably should have waited a few seconds. Okay.
What do you mean? I can't believe you're not perfect, Mary.
That, you know, I look at those as opportunities to see. That's all, really. You know.
Well, we've had a couple of lovely comments saying how, you know, how grateful they are for you both sharing your personal experiences. And Andrea sent a message in earlier. Andrea's in Germany. I know Andrea, and she was saying she had to leave early. And was saying how much she was enjoying it and have to leave early. And now she sent a message through saying she couldn't leave, because even Mary just touched her heart so much, how marvellous that they opened up to us what they had to share. So there you go. You touched people today. That's wonderful. That's, you know, thank you. Really, truly, thank you for being so open and sharing your stories. Really, really appreciate that.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, you guys got nominated. I didn't say that, actually. You know, nominated to be here on the call with us today. So we're very, very grateful that you took the time out to be with us. So thank you.